Okay, let's take 7 or whatever we're on here. Anyways, I was trying to kick it off by saying that when you are writing a research proposal, it's very different from many of the academic papers you're probably accustomed to write. And the main differences are obviously your audience. Instead of being critiqued by an advisor or a faculty who is going to, make sure you've got all the references needed, APA formatting, all of that, this is a little bit of I don't want to say less formal, but it's a very different type of writing. And my main things I'm wanting to stretch here is thinking about who your audience is. Is it, the main thing is that with a proposal, it's much more about the emotion or the heart or the passion of what it is that you're doing or what you want to do, which is a little bit different than trying to start with all of that background information and previous research that we start out many of our academic papers with. I also want you to think about voice and actually inserting yourself into a proposal. A lot of times we write in a passive voice or talk about ourselves as this neutral third-party researcher, but it's okay in most proposals to insert yourself, who you are as a person, and making that connection to your research. In fact, I think that often helps sell the case and puts more emotion in it by sharing your own personal connection to the research. So these are the main bullet points. What is the key point of my work? What is the impact I want this work to have? And why is this important to me and others? Oops, next slide. The tips I have are, again, identifying your audience. There are differences, and JulieAnna will touch on the different types of funders. It can be different when you write for a foundation versus maybe the federal agencies. Foundations especially, you are most likely writing a proposal to a specific foundation because your interests align with their mission, and that tends to have a bit more of a personal situation and context to it. The biggest thing too is what they need to know. This is not the time to have your huge lit review with every piece of resources and references you've ever found on the topic. In fact, it's the polar opposite. You want to find the most critical points that are backed up with research. Otherwise, this is very much you, what you're doing, what's new that you're adding, why it's important, and less about the previously done research. Think about this as a one-sentence description. We all talk about those elevator pitches of the type of research we do and why it matters. Something we've started to try to talk about with our faculty here is, instead of describing your research in a handful of sentences, try to describe the ultimate question your research is after. What matters about what you're doing? What is the big problem or challenge that you're trying to solve? The one I have in bold here is avoid jargon. Depending on the call that you are writing a proposal for, you're not writing to somebody who is an expert in your topic. In fact, in social science research, they might be getting proposals from every end of the spectrum, and you can't expect that the reviewers are experts in every single one of those topics. So think about trying to explain this to a neighbor or a roommate who maybe isn't an academic. You want to strip this of jargon, talk about it in a way that anyone could connect with and understand, and be as concise as possible. And I kind of have that again at the bottom. The biggest thing is practicing with non-academics. Anytime you can explain to somebody outside of academia what you do and you don't see their eyes glaze over, that's when you know you're resonating and that they understand the significance of your work. Here is a diagram of the inverted pyramid, and I'm going to show this one quickly and then go to the next, but you're essentially starting with your big point first, you're adding in some detail, and you're concluding with a honed, highly detailed point. This is kind of the flip of what we tend to do. Again, I'm mostly repeating what I've already shared with you, but you don't want to start out with a huge backup of literature, of things that have been done previously. Instead, you may not have the results, because if you're writing a proposal, you're writing a proposal for research that you're going to do, but you're starting with the so what, the why. Why does this matter? What is new? What are you going to add to it? And then you're bringing in a little bit of evidence. And here, these links are packed full of resources. UW-Madison one, literally for anything you might want to write, they've got examples. So I just included these here. I hope you find them helpful. Biggest line is trying to shift your mindset outside of an academic paper and writing it to a very different audience, removing as much jargon, being as personal as you can, connecting yourself to the research to sell and make that heartfelt connection for what it is that you're doing and why it matters. And with that, I'm going to kick it over to JulieAnna.
Okay, JulieAnna.
There we are. Okay, thank you so much. So dovetailing off what Clarin was talking about, getting into how to find funders in really the need, uncovering what your need is, what your goals are. And this introductory slide for the funding aspect is kind of where to start. So what is your long-term goal? Do you want to go into an assistant professorship? Do you want to go into a research position? Do you want to go into just solely faculty and really focusing and honing on teaching? And whatever track you and goal that you have and that you're choosing for your long-term career, research, scholarship, and funding can all go hand in hand, and one can feed the other. You can start out with a research project that's sponsored and funded by an external agency and then publish on that, and that can develop your scholarship. Or you can start with scholarship coming out of your dissertation work, and then down the road, as you're becoming an expert in your field, then you can apply for grant funding. So these can go hand in hand, and there isn't one track that is preferred above another when you're looking in the grants world. Next slide. So in the grants world, and when you're looking for funding and trying to qualify opportunities that align with your goals, there's a few key things that will help you qualify and make sure it's an actual fit and that it's going to work for you in the long term. So we're going to talk about identifying relevant funding opportunities, qualifying that fit. Do they actually meet your needs and your long-term goals? And are you eligible? That's usually the place I always start, because if you're not eligible for a funding opportunity or a sponsor, there's no need to continue looking and trying to build a relationship with them. Timelines and deadlines, and then award requirements and stipulations. Next slide. So in those, the funders, we often see about three main domains throughout the government and society of where the funding is coming from. So the predominantly largest grants that are usually at higher levels with advanced research, program level funding is going to come from the government. And that's in the annual government budget process that is approved by Congress. And that can either be a very high level program, or sometimes your university or an institution may have a high level program that's funded by the government. And then you can apply to be a program participant. So for instance, like the Fulbright Hayes program and scholarship, that's government funded. You can apply to go abroad with linguistics. That may be part of your program, and learning about other cultures and languages. Some of that funding is going to come from the government, and they'll have additional restrictions and stipulations to that type of funding to meet government requirements and federal law. So a few examples: Department of Ed, National Institutes of Health. The Fulbright Hayes program is actually funded in part by Department of State and Department of Education. Another great source of funding comes from your professional organizations. So as you all are here today meeting with us, many organizations will offer what are called seed grants, or they'll have tracks, programs, focuses, and themes. So they'll offer usually smaller end, $500 to a couple of $1,000 to develop a concept or present at a conference, things of that nature. And then there's philanthropic. So these are predominantly not-for-profit agencies. Spencer Foundation, Ford, the PEO Scholars, one that you may be familiar with. Foundation and philanthropic funding traditionally is looking to solve a societal need or have a societal impact to your work. So that's a big difference between that and government funding, which is usually funded by taxpayer money. and is looking more for program implementation or evaluation. Next slide. And just a few ways to actually find funders within those three main domains. Network. Always start with your peers and your advisors and the other folks in your department of, what projects are they working on? What sources of funding are they utilizing? And what's worked for them? Learn from them. Join professional organizations, as we just spoke of. Read journals and note funding sources. That's one of my favorites, just to see what is being published and who is funding that publication. Subscribe to funder newsletters. So I usually go on Twitter, ResearchGate, Google Scholar, and I'll look at both sides. So PIs and doctoral students or even grad students that are publishing, where was that funding coming from? And once I find that source, I'll go on Twitter and other sources and actually subscribe to their channels and newsletters. And then mine listservs. So these can be really expensive. Some of the databases that are available at your library, that's that next bullet there, are a way to get around subscription services. So organizations like Pivot or SkyVal or Dimensions, these are words that you may hear when you're in the funding space looking for funding, but most of them are subscription based that you may be able to access at your local library. And the Consortium for Language Teaching and Learning, that was just a list that I quickly found online, may or may not be applicable to you and your goals and program, but it has a extensive list of funding opportunities on that list. And you can also create social media alerts and Twitter lists. So that's kind of the mindset of set it and forget it. It's a way to manage your time effectively. So when you find those sites on Google Scholar or Twitter, ResearchGate, you can follow scholars, but you can also follow and set up alerts for the funders. So next slide. This is an example of that. So on the left-hand side, we have a very well-known program officer that was with the Spencer Foundation for many years and actually came here to ASU and did a presentation for our faculty. And following that, I thought, this is probably someone that I should be following and just understanding her research and what circles she's operating in. And so I went on to Google Scholar, found her, set an alert. So you can see there on the right-hand side, it's just a very simple, follow tab button that you're tabbing. And now I get email updates every time she publishes, who she's publishing with, who's funding her publications and research and outcomes and scholarship. And that's a way for me to kind of stay on top of what's happening in that area of research and scholarship, and who's the common funders other than Spencer, although she worked for Spencer, that are in that space. And on the right-hand side, Twitter, very kind of self-explanatory there. Set up your own account. For many years, I had like 5 different accounts that I created with different personas. And then I learned about lists. So the easiest way for me now is to have a single Twitter account to manage and follow. And the sponsors that I'm tracking, I hit the follow button. I get alerts sent to me when they have an updated social media blurb. And then I also have created lists in my Twitter by category. So if it's early childhood education or linguistics or international work in Africa, let's say there's sponsors in that space, I create separate lists that I can very quickly just go to the list and see all the updates in that space. Next screen. And then qualifying that fit and eligibility. Read the fine print. I think I'm going to say that probably in the next slide as well. Understand what the expected outcomes are of that sponsor, that opportunity, that funding, and make sure that it aligns with your short-term aims, and it will help you build that path that will help you reach your long-term goals. Oftentimes, professors, and as folks get more tenure and advanced in their positions, they will have a concept that they will kind of shop out and say, who can fund my idea? But as time goes forward, and this is not the ideal way to go about it, but we find opportunities that we make our work fit into. And that's not always the best way to go about it because and that happens very often in the philanthropic space, because they have very defined goals that they want to achieve, societal outcomes they want to see. And then totally reframing your line of work to fit one call may not be the best option for your long-term goals. The next bullet, dissertation completion award requirements versus doctoral program requirements. So if you're going to go for a Ford Foundation doctoral or Spencer doctoral, make sure that it's aligning with where your academic career or goals are headed. Type of degree, specialty, this is when we see with Ford Foundation and the larger grant opportunities, they want specialists in specific areas they're going to fund. Degree conferral date, that's part of the eligibility there. If your date doesn't align, you're not eligible, no need to apply, but maybe put on your calendar for the next year or down the line. And then nationality and geographic region. Nationality can be across the board. Geographic region is very common in the philanthropic space. They usually want to fund, especially with like the Arizona Community Foundation, local students, local researchers, local subject matter experts that are going to affect their local communities. Next slide. And then timelines and deadlines. So other than just reading the timeline, it can be challenging sometimes to anticipate in long range plans. So if you're trying to build out, what am I going to do in 12, 24 in future months? Just something to keep in mind. So those three domains that we discussed at the beginning of the slides, they usually have very different timelines that they are operating on. We call those their fiscal calendars. The federal fiscal calendar traditionally across all programs will begin October 1, and that's where you'll see they're either closing out their budgets or they're releasing all the new programs that they had pre-planned. Department of Ed is a little wonky, so they will release solicitations and funding announcements throughout the year because they have so many different programs. But just remember that October 1 for federal opportunities is the date to watch. That's when their budgets are closing and the new year budgets are starting. The academic calendar for ASU, it depends also if you're on a semester or the type of fiscal calendar of each institution, but at ASU, at least it's July 1, and that is common in higher education. And then philanthropic foundations, they can also often, it's June, the mid-year mark, or their calendar, their fiscal calendar year can start January 1 and follow a normal calendar year. And so that's just to pay attention to the application deadlines, but also to anticipate. So if you know it was a foundation, it probably was a program that was either at the beginning or the end of the year. That will help you plan down the road to align it with your goals. Next slide. And then award requirements. So here's the fine print. Things that are commonly go or no go, things to consider as you're making those decisions is if you can travel. Conferences may be in DC, it may be at the sponsor's headquarters. That's very common in foundation spaces and philanthropic spaces. Are you available? You know, is that when your finals are going to be, or when you're going to be out conducting an evaluation or putting together, the finalizing your dissertation thesis? It really depends. So make sure that you are reading that fine print and what their expectations are of you and their expected outcomes that they're hoping you will deliver throughout the funding cycle. Can you apply for opportunities from other sponsor agencies while the award is active? This is common with Spencer Foundation and others. You're only allowed to have one award from them at a time. And if you apply to, your strategy is, I'm going to apply for a dissertation, and then I'm going to try to work with this PI or this faculty member on a few other projects, that is probably not going to work. So really try to align the opportunity with your goals and invest the time to create a compliant, persuasive, and well-written application. And then if there's other opportunities out there, plan those in the future, not all at the same time. Next slide. Is that the end? That's the end. Okay. So thank you very much for your time and for sticking around, and I'll hand it back to the facilitator.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Collins and JulieAnna, for this really informative talk. So I think we decided with Dr. Collins to have a Q&A with the two of you right now, and then have the video by Dr. Dovchin later so that we could make sure you don't have to stay too late in your offices. So this being said, if anyone has any questions to Dr. Collins and Ms. Carsen, please send them in the chat. Yes, and I will unmute both Dr. Collins and JulieAnna right now. Yes, I think you should be able to do so now.
Okay, yeah, I was able to now. Okay.
Okay.
I'm looking at Blanche's question about APA. Requires pages instead of word limits. Font size. JulieAnna, I'll take your take on this too. From the internal perspective, again, I oversee an internal grants program for mostly our early career faculty to kind of get them used to working, what it's like to work with a funder and the types of back and forth we need to go with for any requests for modifications, et cetera. But I would say if you're really stuck to a page limit, do your best with only slightly reducing your font size. Otherwise, this kind of gets back to like grade school or high school tactics where you're using Courier New because it takes up the most space to try to make your statement there. And again, I would just reiterate to be as simple and straightforward as possible. You know, drop a citation if you can. Use only one that's like most commonly known for that piece of information, and just try to reduce and consolidate as much as possible. And that's where hopefully you're in the practice of it as graduate students of getting peer reviews. Blanche was a student in one of the classes that I taught, and I think that's honestly the most valuable point of our class is to get comfortable letting other people see your writing, because you might think you're being as concise as possible, and somebody else might look at it and say, you know what, Blanche, you could probably say this in one sentence instead of 3. So I kind of answered you and kind of went on a tangent. JulieAnna, do you have any other thoughts with external proposals?
Yes, so there is no hard and fast rule. APA, I think their philosophy is, is it coherent, clear, concise, coherent. And so a lot of the writing styles that they've standardized, are always, that's the goal, is that they're making standards that make it easier to understand a body of work. Every sponsor is different. So NSF, they have hard and fast rules. Mm-hmm. They want to see like Times New Roman. They have 2 different font sizes that you may, that you can change. Department of Education is also tough. So Department of Education, they want to see it double spaced. They have very specific phrasing and headings that they want you to add in there. So they know you're addressing participant recruitment and GEPA statements and federal laws. They're also, most programs they've gotten better, but they're still pretty strict on Times New Roman and the 12 font size. So always, again, read that fine print. Read the formatting instructions. Is it 1 page? Is it 2 page? Can you have a running head or not? Do they want your email address? We see that with dissertation funding announcements quite often. The headings, some allow page numbers, some do not. And if you are kind of like anything in the professional world, if it's you and someone else, that all things being equal, you have the same amount of experience, you have similarly interesting tracks. What is the one thing that's a reviewer is going to use to say, okay, well, we want A over B? It may be just how close and how clearly you articulated your concept and how closely you adhered to their formatting and guidance and guidelines. So that's one way to stand out. And in many funders, it's the one thing that they will return it without review if it does not meet their formatting and guidelines.
Thank you for this response. I actually had a question myself about formulating your grant applications. So I think, Dr. Collins, you mentioned earlier that we should try and avoid, using specialized jargon and words that are related to like really discipline-specific notions. But then at the same time, right, we don't want to sound too like generic and maybe I guess what I'm trying to say is that sometimes like the other end would be sort of dangerous too, because the readers might think that we are not really that
experts or
knowledgeable exactly in the field. So how to determine that like gray area of, okay, I'm not sounding too complex to understand, but also not too simple.
Yeah, it's a fine balance and something I think you get more confident and comfortable with the more proposals that you write. Again, I would just go back to the benefit of reviewing and working with colleagues to look over your paper. I'm not saying leave all jargon out. Like if there are a few key terms that if you don't include in your proposal, they won't even consider you, knowledgeable on the content. So definitely include those. But, when you're reading a proposal and sentence after sentence includes a term or a phrase that they then have to explain, it's just onerous for the reader to even understand what they mean. So I don't have an exact answer for you, but it's just try to do your best. Like, yes, include the main key concepts, but don't overdo it.
Well, and also always situating in context. So environment may mean something very different to biologists than it does to media. That's another one. Media, marketing, it means one thing, and public relations, it means one thing. And in environmental science, it means something very different. So those terms, be cognizant, but in context situated. By that we mean X, Y, Z. And if you are going to use jargon, if it's very specific to, your niche topic or type of science that you're trying to introduce. And like Clarin said, you're not going to be coherent without bringing that up. It's the elephant in the room. You must bring it up. Always define it in context. And that will also help reviewers, as Clarin said, they're not experts in everything. So if they understand the context of how you're using it or even do a parenthetical quick definition of how you're using it, that term, that technology, whatever it may be, that's helpful. And that's just good writing too, a good writing practice in general.
Yes, thank you.
Also about language, if you're using Microsoft Word, so you can check the level that it's at. So the common standard in like mass communications, for instance, that's an 8th grade reading level. So social media posts and things of that nature, that's an appropriate score in Microsoft Word. However, for academic writing, and depending on if it's NSF, you can probably go up to grade 14. If it's a philanthropic organization that wants societal change, looking for funding local scholarships or research on K through 12 language programs, ELA, things of that nature, that's going to be very different. You may want to go to the 8th grade reading level so that it's easier to understand and it's not so academic. If it's more geared towards practical application or social programs.
Yes, that makes sense. Thank you. Any other questions? Please feel free to send them in the chat or unmute yourself or raise your hand and I can unmute you.
I think we did such a great job. Nobody has questions. That's wonderful. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Collins, and thank you so much, JulieAnna, for being here today, despite all the complications we had. We do have another video by Dr. Dovchin from Australia, and she did send us a recording, but I think we can let Dr. Collins and JulieAnna go. Thank you so much again. That was very, very helpful and informative.
Thank you,
guys. Thank you for having us.
Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you. All right. So we do have one more presentation for us today, as I said, by Dr. Sender Dovchin. And Lupe is going to be sharing her screen to demonstrate the presentation. So stick around and yeah, we're going to get started now.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sender Dovchin. I'm from School of Education, Curtin University. And today I'll be talking about applying for external funding for graduate students of the American Applied Linguistics Association. So thank you so much for inviting me as well. Now, before I start my webinar, I would like to say a few words. What is really externally funded research? External funded research is, of course, research projects funded by organizations external to the university. So that means it can be they can be federal departments or government agencies, international awards and fellowship programs, or not-for-profit foundations, private companies, and even multicultural corporations. So any kind of research projects that are funded beyond the university or external to the university are called externally funded research projects. And as you can see in my slide here, one of the main funding bodies in Australia is Australian Research Council, which is funded by the Australian government. Also here, Japanese Society for the Promotion of Science, which is also one of the main funding body in Japan that we sometimes call Kakenki. Here you can see the German Academic Exchange Service, which is DAG, and Spencer Foundation, Forest Research Foundations, where they also fund some externally funded research. Now, if you go to the University of Michigan University library source, you can see all these fundings in order. So you can see the state and federal government agency fundings here, and you can also see some of the fundings here by foundations and public charities and not for-profit organizations. So it's important to find out what research project is most suitable for you in terms of your research track record, in terms of your research timeline, and so forth. Now, in terms of eligibility, funding eligibility varies greatly by the funders. So many funds can, of course, only be available to residents or citizens of a specific region or country, or to applicants of a specific discipline. For example, if you're applying for the Kakenki, which is a research grant for Japanese Society for Science and Promotion, usually they would likely to fund researchers based in Japan. But there are also many external funds that can be internationally competitive and require an academic and leadership qualifications internationally. For example, one of the main funding bodies in Australia, which is Australian Research Council, here they have funded Discovery Early Career Research Award in 2022. And this is also internationally competitive because you can see here foreign nationals have applied for this award, and there were 252 applications, and from here 50 applications were approved with a success rate of 19.8, and then there are resident Australians, and 675 of them applied for these, with 130 were approved. And then returning Australians means Australians who are based overseas but who want to come back to Australia. So 69 returning Australians applied for this award, and also 16 were approved. So as you can see, one of the most competitive but one of the most main research funding body in Australia, they do actually try to attract outstanding researchers from overseas as well. Now, I would like to talk about why external funding is so important. External funding is very important for if you have decided, if you have made your decision to pursue your academic career. It gives you financial support while you are continuing your academic research career, especially if you want to continue a research career in academia. It will help to boost your academic resume, research resume. It will also enhance your research development. And funding is very important. If you don't get funding, you can't do your research. Of course, there is a small, internal fundings from university, but usually they can be used for small scale research. For example, small case studies or, small sample size experimental research. You can use small amount of internal research grants, but without external funding, you're not able to conduct large scale multicentral studies or longitudinal or ethnographic studies that you are very passionate about, and you are not really in a good position to conduct large sample size research without external funding. So external funding is important for us academics. But I would also like to add that fellowship is a bit different, because fellowship is generally it's a monetary award given to a scholar to pay for his or her academic merits and pursuits, and fellowship usually pays the academic salary, and it's a merit-based, award. Whereas grant is a bit different, but grant is usually you only get certain amount of grant, for example, over 100K grant for your research projects just to conduct that research, but it doesn't necessarily pay your salary. Usually university will end up paying you, salary. So the fellowship is a good opportunity, especially for early career researchers after their PhDs. But also, external grant is also important as well. Now, I would like to shed light a little bit about my own personal experience. So I can tell you my personal experience in terms of external funding, why it's so important. So when I completed my PhD at University of Technology in Sydney, Australia, I couldn't find a suitable job in Australia, and I've started applying for academic jobs elsewhere overseas, like Japan and Singapore. And I finally had a job offer from Japan, which I was quite happy, but it was more like a teaching-oriented job in Japan, whereas I had a very big passion in terms of my research. And I wanted to move back to Australia for some other personal reasons, but I could not find any research-related academic job in Australia. The job market was very small, and so the only way really to get into the Australian academic job market was to apply for external funding, which is Discovery Early Career Researcher Award, to be more specific. And I applied for this award from Japan as a returning Australian, and I have really prepared my application for about over a year. And I wasn't really sure if I was going to be funded or not, because I know it was very, very competitive. And I have prepared the application from Japan, and I applied from Japan, but luckily I was successful. And it was a 3-year fellowship, and because of this funding, this award has given me an opportunity to return to Australia. This has given me the opportunity to apply for a tenured full-time academic job in Australia. And also because of this award, I was able being promoted. And this was a great opportunity. It was a life changer for me, So as you can see how external funding can be quite important for someone's academic career. So within this fellowship, of which lasted for 3 years, I was able to manage to publish a lot as well, which also really helped me as well. Now I will talk a little bit about research grant writing in progress. So applying for a research grant is obviously you have to write a research grant proposal, which is a very time-consuming, very arduous, very hard work. As I mentioned before, when I applied for the Australian Research Council Fellowship, it took me almost over a year. So ideally, the draft research proposal should be really ready much before the call for proposal, and every step should be meticulously planned to avoid any sort of rush just before the deadline. So, I will talk about the proposal development, and number one key ideas about writing a proposal. For me, it's the idea. You need to have a new idea. You need to have a great idea what to write, So idea is the most important aspect of the research. After having that new idea in mind, you can literally you can refine your ideas by going through literature reviews or finding out what has already been done in that area, and what are you going to do, or what is the main research gap in that area. So developing idea is very important. And you need to convey your peer reviewers answers to the following questions, such as what issue will my research proposal address? Why is it so important and timely and relevant? What is already known about this issue, and how is my idea is very much innovative? How is it going to advance knowledge in the field? You know, these are the questions that you must answer when you develop your research proposal. Now, the second most important key point to develop your research proposal is showing who you are. You must shine, you know, you must shine. This is your time to shine. So you have to show the reviewers how good you are. Your academic excellence should be demonstrated by your academic achievement, scholarly excellence, by your publications, by your teaching courses, by your research potential and contributions in the field, by your leadership. So reviewers, they tend to give credit for steadily improving or consistently good performance. And you also have to show your research ability and potential and feasibility, your determination and ability to complete these projects within an appropriate period of time. You have to demonstrate your work experience, your research contributions and letter of appraisals and department appraisals and so forth. Overall, you have to show who you are as a researcher. That's the second important thing to consider when you write your research grant. Now, these are some of the important steps in writing research grants. So as I said, idea is very important to develop, but also designing your study, your idea is also very important, because details about the type of study, methodology and sampling, you know, inclusion and exclusion criteria, outcome measurements, statistical analysis. So these are the very important things to consider when you design your study. Well-designed study is the first step of a very well-executed research project. It is difficult to correct flawed study design when the project is advanced. So it's very much important to plan it very well ahead and talk about it with your colleagues and supervisors and co-workers. And also, it's also very important to identify the prospective grants as well, the timing of the applications, the specific requirements of the grant, and also, you know, working with other collaborators and co-investigators, identifying who's the leading academic in the field, or who's the early career researchers, and how you're going to co-complement this research project is also very important. And preparing a specific proposal as outlined in the grant document is some of the key points as well. Timeline should always be very much important to accompany any research proposal. And the researcher also should be ready for revising you know, the grant proposal. The proposal also should be written in a layman language, because in the committee members who are going to read your proposal, there will be a lot of different people in different, you know, specialized areas, and they might not be able to understand the specific jargon in your area, for example, in applied linguistics. So it's always good to write a research proposal in a language which even laymen can understand. So it's quite different from writing for example, research paper or research articles. And it's always a good idea to get the proposal peer reviewed later before your submission. Other very important part of your research grant is budgeting for the research grant, which can be quite time consuming and quite, you know, tiring as well. Budgeting is important as the methodology for grant proposal, because you know, sometimes if you have a really good or well-organized budget, the peer reviewers can be quite, you know, confident about your research proposal. So the first step is to find out what is the monetary limit for a grant proposal, and what are the fund requirements for your project. And you need to also find out, you know, what is the budgetary layout should be prepared with the amount necessary for conduct of your research. So in this slide, you can see the funds that are generally allotted in a granted manner as per projected requirements, but not limited to. You can see the purchase of equipment, so you can ask for purchase of equipment which is not available in your own department or institution, or you can also ask for budget for hiring trained personnel. So it can include research assistants, graduate students, or data entry operator, translators, interpreters, and so forth. Stationery can be asked, and travel expense and publication expense can be asked. In the publication expense, you can also ask for open access publication, and also the other consumables such as auditing, the fund accounting, and other essential expenses. So please focus on your budgeting really carefully, because it can make a difference. Overall, the merits of a good application is the application is very well organized, no typos, or no grammatical errors, and you have answered all the questions, and you have very good innovative ideas, and you have very good academic record, and your aptitude and experience is well detailed on your applications. Remember, it's time for you to shine, and the statement of purpose or research proposal covers your background, your scholarly pursuits, research methodology, and specific goals and plan of action covering the areas that are important to you, or important in that area. And you have to ensure to list all other awards of merit recognition received during your academic career, and list all your publications, public conference presentations, even if it was in not so traditional academic publications such as conversation, you should list them all. Remember, this is your time to shine, and you have to show them how you can do this research project. So thank you so much for watching my webinar. If you have any further questions, please do email me, and I wish you all the best for your external funding, research grants or fellowships, and I'll speak to you later.
All right. So as I mentioned earlier, this was a video recording from Dr. Dovchin, and as she mentioned at the end of the video, if you have any questions for her, she's welcoming email. And again, she's at Curtin University in Australia. All right, so it looks like we are done with our webinar a little bit earlier than expected, but nevertheless, thank you so much, everyone, for being here, and thank you for your questions. Thank you for participating in the discussion. We hope you continue attending our webinars, and we hope to see a lot of you at AAAL. Thanks, everyone.